March 22nd, 2024. A bright Tuesday afternoon in Chicago that should have been ordinary. Inside the Velvet Anchor, an upscale waterfront bistro, two masked men kicked through the service entrance at 12:47 p.m., sawed-off shotguns raised, voices raw with chemical courage. They got the cash from the register. They got the Rolex watches and diamond earrings from the lunch crowd. They got the screams and the sobbing and the predictable human terror. Except from one person. Security footage leaked 72 hours later showed a waitress in a wine-stained uniform standing 3 feet from a 12-gauge barrel, methodically folding cloth napkins into perfect triangles. Her hands never shook. Her pulse, according to the Apple Watch she wore, never rose above 62 beats per minute. The internet called her the Ice Waitress. Memes spread. News anchors debated shock responses. Psychiatrists theorized about dissociation. But for Oscar Green, the most dangerous man in Chicago, watching from the shadows of corner booth 17, she wasn't a curiosity. She was a ghost he thought he'd never see again. And he knew that kind of calm doesn't come from shock. It comes from having already survived worse. Much worse. This is the story of how a waitress's stillness started a war. If that footage of the Ice Waitress gave you chills, hit subscribe now. Because Kira's calm wasn't shock, it was survival instinct from a past that's about to detonate her carefully built invisible life. Stories about ghosts who refuse to stay buried deserve to be heard. Subscribe, and let's discover what kind of training keeps your pulse at 62 while staring down a shotgun. The incident occurred at the Velvet Anchor, a semi-exclusive bistro perched on the Chicago River's edge, where the Kennedy Expressway met the water. It was the kind of establishment where venture capitalists courted senators over oysters, where the marble floors were polished twice daily, and where the lighting was always warm enough to make everyone look like they belonged there. Kira Bailey, 26 years old, was a phantom. That was the point. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a masterclass in human camouflage. She had dark hair pulled into a regulation bun, wore foundation 2 shades lighter than her natural skin tone, and kept her movements economical, almost robotic. She spoke only when spoken to. She never made eye contact longer than 2 seconds. To the customers, she was ambient service, background noise with a pulse. To the manager, she was the employee who never called in sick, never complained about the graveyard shifts, and accepted her paychecks without questions. But on this particular afternoon, the delicate ecosystem of the restaurant was disrupted. Sitting in booth 17, the corner table with sightlines to both the kitchen entrance and the street-facing exit, was Oscar Green. At 34, Green was the acting head of the Green Syndicate, having inherited control after his uncle's execution-style murder 18 months prior. He was a man who lived in 3-hour sleep cycles and trusted no one. He wore a navy Tom Ford suit, drank black coffee from a porcelain cup, and his eyes moved across the room like a sniper calculating wind speed. Flanking him were 2 enforcers who looked like they'd been raised on concrete and violence. Oscar wasn't there for the pan-seared salmon. He was waiting for an informant who was already 20 minutes late. He was agitated. At 12:47 p.m., the service entrance exploded inward. It wasn't tactical. It was blunt trauma with a boot and bad planning. 2 men in ski masks stormed through, one wielding a sawed-off Remington, the other swinging a Glock 19 like a flag. The sound of splintering would cut through the Mozart concerto playing softly overhead. Everybody on the fucking floor. Now. Phones, wallets, watches on the tables. The leader's voice cracked on the last syllable, betraying his inexperience. Chaos detonated. A woman in Chanel screamed, her champagne flute shattering against tile. A banker threw himself under his table, appending a $50 plate of Dover sold that scattered across the floor like evidence. A young couple clutched each other, sobbing. Kira Bailey was standing at the beverage station near the bar, pouring Bordeaux into a crystal decanter. The crash didn't make her turn her head. She didn't gasp. She didn't drop the bottle. The second robber, younger, twitchier, wearing a faded Cubs hoodie under his leather jacket, vaulted over a chair and charged toward the bar. When the bartender dove behind the counter, the gunman swung his shotgun toward Kira. He shoved the barrel against her temple. The steel was cold, still wet from the rain that had fallen that morning. "You. Open the register. Now. Or I'll redecorate this whole fucking room with your skull." Kira didn't blink. She finished pouring the wine. Kira Bailey lived in apartment 3C of a forgettable building on West Diversey, the kind of structure that city planners designed specifically to be ignored. Gray brick. Functional windows. A lobby that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. Her unit was 680 square feet of deliberate emptiness. No photographs on the walls. No plants on the windowsill. No throw pillows or decorative candles or any of the performative softness that normal people use to convince themselves they had built a home. She owned exactly what she needed. A futon that doubled as a couch. A single plate, a single fork, a single glass. A television she never turned on. The refrigerator contained Greek yogurt, pre-cut vegetables, and bottled water arranged in perfect rows. The bathroom cabinet held generic ibuprofen, dental floss, and a first aid kit she'd restocked twice in 3 years without ever explaining the burns. She had no friends. This was intentional. The woman in 4B once invited her to a book club. Kira declined with a smile calibrated to communicate polite disinterest without offense. The mailman tried making small talk about the weather. She nodded, collected her utility bills, and disappeared back upstairs before he could ask her name. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., her internal clock woke her without an alarm. She ran 6 miles along the lakeshore, varying her route every third day. She showered in under 4 minutes. She ate oatmeal with blueberries standing at the kitchen counter, facing the door. Her shifts at the Velvet Anchor started at 11 a.m. She arrived at 10:42. Not 10:30. Not 10:45. Consistency bred suspicion. She clocked in, tied her apron, and became part of the architecture. But even in the supposed safety of routine, her training never slept. She cataloged exits in every room she entered. She noted which customers carried concealed weapons, the telltale printing under suit jackets, the way men adjusted their waistbands. She memorized license plates in the parking lot. She identified which of her coworkers would run during a crisis and which would freeze. At night, she returned to 3C, locked 3 separate deadbolts, and wedged a chair under the doorknob. She didn't sleep deeply. She never had. Nobody noticed Kira Bailey because Kira Bailey had spent 4 years making sure nobody could. Kira was untying her apron in the employee corridor when she felt the shift in air pressure that meant someone was blocking her exit. She didn't flinch. She'd been expecting this conversation for 3 days, ever since the video hit 2 million views and her face became searchable. Oscar Green stood between her and the service door, hands in his pockets, posture deceptively casual. His 2 enforcers flanked him at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. The hallway smelled like fryer grease and bleach. "You're off at 9, right?" His voice was quieter than she expected. No theatrics. No posturing. 9:15, Kira said. She folded the apron with mechanical precision, not looking at him. "I'd like to buy you a drink." "I don't drink." "Coffee then." "I don't drink coffee after 7. Disrupt sleep patterns." Oscar smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, sharp, green, unblinking, were performing an assessment she recognized from a different life. He was cataloging her stance, her breathing, the micro-expressions most people didn't know they were broadcasting. "Which unit did you serve in?" The question landed like a blade between ribs. Precise. Practiced. Kira's hands stilled for half a second before resuming their fold. To anyone else, the pause would have been invisible. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her tone was flawless, confused, slightly annoyed, Exactly what a normal waitress would sound like. Yes, you do. Oscar took one step closer. Not threatening. Curious. I've seen a lot of fear in my line of work, Miss Bailey. I've seen people piss themselves. I've seen grown men cry. I've seen a priest beg for his mother. He tilted his head. But I've never seen someone finish pouring wine with a shotgun against their skull. That's not bravery. That's training. Kira met his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to communicate she wasn't intimidated. Short enough to avoid challenge. Sometimes people freeze. You didn't freeze. You calculated. Oscar pulled a business card from his jacket, extended it between 2 fingers. When you're ready to stop pretending you're nobody, call me. Because whoever's looking for you, and someone is always looking, they're not going to be as polite as I am. He left the card on the folding table. Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like a countdown. The knock came at 11:34 p.m., 6 minutes after Kira had wedged the chair under her doorknob and begun her nightly perimeter check. She froze mid-step, her hand instinctively moving toward the chef's knife she kept magnetized to the underside of the kitchen counter. Delivery for Bailey, 3C, a voice called through the door. Male. Baritone. Accent flattened, regional markers scrubbed clean, the vocal equivalent of a rental car. Kira hadn't ordered anything. She never ordered anything. She moved to the peephole silently, her bare feet making no sound on the laminate floor. Through the fisheye lens, she saw a man in a DoorDash uniform holding a thermal bag. Ball cap pulled low. Disposable surgical mask covering most of his face. His stance was wrong, weight distributed forward, ready to move. Delivery drivers leaned back, tired from climbing stairs. Wrong apartment, Kira said through the door. Says 3C right here on The door exploded inward. Not kicked. Breached with a tactical ram that splintered the frame and sent the chair skittering across the floor. The man dropped the thermal bag and came through fast, a suppressed Sig Sauer already clearing his jacket. Kira was already moving. She'd drilled this scenario 200 times in another life. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She dropped below his sightline, grabbed the knife from its mount, and drove upward in one fluid motion. The blade entered just below his floating rib, angled toward the liver, a wound that would kill in minutes, not seconds. He grunted, squeezed the trigger. The suppressed round punched through her futon, sending up a puff of cheap foam. Kira twisted the knife, felt the resistance of tissue, then withdrew and struck again, this time targeting the femoral artery. Blood sprayed in arterial pulses, hot against her forearm. The assassin collapsed, gun clattering. He tried to apply pressure to his leg with shaking hands, but the damage was catastrophic. His eyes met hers confused, maybe even impressed, before the light began to fade. Kira stood over him, breathing steady, heart rate barely elevated. The knife dripped onto her kitchen floor in a metronome rhythm. She had 13 minutes before the blood seeped into 2C's ceiling. She pulled out Oscar Green's business card from her pocket, the edges already worn from where she'd been turning it over and over for 3 days. Time to make the call. That moment when she finally made the call? Heart-stopping. Smash like if you felt it too. Kira's done being a ghost, now she's becoming a queen. Subscribe so you see exactly how a waitress dismantles the system that created her. Tell me below, would you have called Oscar? Now, the hunt begins. Oscar Green answered on the second ring. No greeting, no surprise in his voice, just 3 words. Where are you? My apartment. 2847 West Diversey, 3C. I have a body and approximately 9 minutes before the neighbor downstairs notices her ceiling is leaking. Kira's tone was clinical, emotionless. The waitress' voice was gone. What remained was the operative. Don't move. 23 minutes later, Oscar arrived with a cleanup crew that operated with surgical efficiency. They photographed the scene, bagged the body, treated the blood spatter with luminol-negating enzymes, and replaced the damaged door frame. By 12:47 a.m., apartment 3C looked like nothing had ever happened. Kira sat on her futon, watching them work. Oscar stood against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, studying her the way a museum curator examines a rare artifact. Professional grade, he said finally, nodding toward where the body had been. Federal? Military? Does it matter? It matters if they're going to send more. Kira met his gaze. They will. The video triggered facial recognition. Someone sold my location for probably 6 figures. That man was the first bid. He won't be the last. Oscar pulled a chair from her small dining table, turned it backward, and sat. So, what do you want from me? Safe house? New identity? One-way ticket to somewhere without extradition. I want my file destroyed. Every backup, every cache, every handler who remembers my designation code. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. I want the people who trained me to forget I ever existed. And I want the bounty on my head eliminated so thoroughly that mentioning my name becomes a career-ending mistake. That's not protection. That's a declaration of war. Yes. Oscar laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement. You know how many people I'd have to kill to pull that off? Federal agents. Black site coordinators. People who don't officially exist. 17, Kira said. I have the list. Names, addresses, security protocols. I've been updating it for 4 years. Oscar studied her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. I get exclusive access to whatever intelligence you extracted when you disappeared. Every secret, every offshore account, every piece of leverage. That's my price. Kira shook his hand. Her grip was iron. Deal. But we start tonight. They relocated to Oscar's private office in a building his shell companies officially didn't own, a penthouse overlooking the Chicago River where the windows were bulletproof and the walls were lined with signal-dampening copper mesh. Kira sat across from him at a table built from reclaimed ship timbers, a laptop open between them. The ledger, Oscar said. I want to see it. Kira's fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist. Encrypted files bloomed across the screen, spreadsheets, wire transfer receipts, account numbers routing through 17 countries. $50 million, parceled and distributed with mathematical elegance. Oscar leaned forward, scanning the data. His expression shifted from anticipation to confusion. These aren't offshore accounts. These are trusts, educational funds, survivor benefits, Kira said quietly. For the families. What families? The ones the government pretended never existed. She pulled up a separate file, photographs, obituaries, redacted death certificates. Operation Nightfall. 43 operatives deployed to eliminate a trafficking network in Eastern Europe. The mission was successful. 31 of us didn't make it home. Officially, those 31 were never there. No death benefits. No military honors. Their families got letters saying their loved ones died in training accidents or car crashes. Oscar's jaw tightened. You stole $50 million to pay death benefits? I liberated funds that were already stolen. Black budget slush accounts built from asset seizures and dark money. The same accounts that paid for the operation that killed my team. Kira's voice remained steady, but something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. My handler told me to move on. Said it was classified, compartmentalized, need to know. He said those families didn't need to know the truth. So you made sure they got something. A college fund. A paid-off mortgage. Enough to rebuild. Kira closed the laptop. I didn't take it for myself. I took it because 31 ghosts deserved better than a fabricated car accident and a flag folded by people who never knew their names. Oscar sat back, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman across from him. That's why they want you dead. Not because you're a security risk. Because you made them look like the monsters they are. Yes. Then we don't just destroy your file, Oscar said. We expose theirs. The tactical briefing began at 3 a.m. in Oscar's basement armory, a climate-controlled vault containing enough firepower to stage a small coup. Kira stood before a corkboard covered in surveillance photos, red string connecting faces to locations like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. She'd changed into black tactical pants and a fitted shirt, her hair pulled back in a way that revealed the thin scar running behind her left ear, old incision point for a subdermal tracker, long since removed. Target 1 is Malcolm Hendricks, former CIA deputy director, now private contractor. She tapped a photo of a silver-haired man in golf attire. He authorized nightfall and personally signed off on the cover-up. He'll be at his lake house in Michigan this weekend. 2 bodyguards, minimal security. We take him first. Oscar leaned against the weapons rack, arms crossed, watching her orchestrate violence with the casual confidence of someone discussing dinner reservations. You've already scouted the location. Last month. I installed cameras in the trees surrounding the property. Motion sensors on the access road. I've been preparing for this longer than you've known I existed. Something shifted in Oscar's expression, not concern, but recognition. You don't need me. Kira turned to face him fully. No. Then why bring me in? Because I can kill 17 people. But I can't make them disappear afterward. I can't scrub forensics or bribe coroners or ensure the investigations go cold. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. I need your infrastructure, your connections, your legitimacy. And what do you give me in return? A partner who won't hesitate when it matters. The space between them compressed. Oscar reached out, his hand hovering near her face before making contact, his thumb tracing the scar behind her ear. You're not a victim looking for rescue. No, you're a weapon looking for a wielder. I'm a weapon that chose her target. Kira's hand found his wrist, not pushing away, but holding steady. The question is whether you're brave enough to pull the trigger. Oscar's other hand settled on her hip, anchoring them both. I've been following you since the moment you poured that wine. Good, Kira whispered. Keep following. Marcus Webb arrived at O'Hare International on a Tuesday morning, flying first class under a diplomatic passport that identified him as a State Department attaché. He was 53, fit in the way career operatives maintain themselves, with wire-rimmed glasses and the forgettable face of a man who'd spent 30 years being professionally unmemorable. Kira watched him clear customs from a maintenance closet she'd accessed using credentials borrowed from Oscar's contacts. She'd hacked the airport security network 2 days prior, giving her eyes on every camera, every checkpoint, every blind spot Webb thought was secure. He's heading to the Fairmont, she said into her encrypted phone. Room 1847. He'll sweep for bugs, check the locks, then order room service at approximately 1900 hours. Grilled salmon, no vegetables, sparkling water. Oscar's voice crackled through the earpiece. You know his dinner order? I know everything about him. He taught me how to become invisible. He forgot to consider what happens when the invisible learn to see. Over the next 72 hours, Chicago transformed into Kira's hunting ground. She was everywhere and nowhere. Webb's rental car developed a slow tire leak from a valve stem she'd loosened in the hotel parking garage. His morning coffee at the Starbucks on Michigan Avenue was served by a barista who happened to be one of Oscar's informants, documenting his schedule. The prostitute who knocked on his hotel door at 11 p.m. was wired with surveillance equipment that captured his phone conversations with Langley. Webb knew he was being watched. That was the point. Kira wanted him paranoid, reactive, making mistakes. On the 4th day, he met with his local asset, a federal prosecutor named Patricia Chin, at Millennium Park. Kira sat on a bench 30 feet away, wearing a blonde wig and oversized sunglasses, feeding pigeons like a tourist. She had a parabolic microphone concealed in her purse, capturing every word. She's here, Webb said, voice tight. I can feel her. Chin glanced around nervously. If Bailey's in Chicago, we need federal support. Full tactical. No. She wants us to escalate. She's baiting us into exposing the operation. Webb's jaw clenched. We trained her to hunt. Now she's hunting us. Kira smiled, scattering breadcrumbs for the birds. The trap was set. All that remained was closing it. The warehouse at Navy Pier had been abandoned for 18 months, officially condemned due to structural concerns, unofficially maintained as a black site for operations requiring deniability. Webb had chosen it for the final meeting: concrete walls, single entrance, killbox sightlines. He'd positioned 6 contractors inside, former Tier 1 operators carrying suppressed carbines, thermal optics, and the absolute certainty that one woman couldn't walk through that door and survive. Kira entered at 2:47 a.m. unarmed, wearing her velvet anchor uniform. The wine stain was still visible on her white shirt. Webb stood at the center of the warehouse floor, bathed in harsh LED work lights that cast long shadows across rusted machinery. His contractors formed a perimeter, red laser dots painting Kira's chest the moment she crossed the threshold. "That's far enough," Webb called out. His voice echoed off corrugated metal. "You're good, Bailey, but you're not bulletproof." Kira stopped walking. Her hands remained at her sides, relaxed, visible. Her heart rate was 58 beats per minute. "I know. Then you know how this ends." "I do." She tilted her head slightly, the gesture almost curious. "Question is whether you've figured it out yet." Webb's jaw tightened. "Last chance. Tell me where the files are, and I'll make it quick." The files uploaded to WikiLeaks 7 minutes ago. 17 journalists across 4 continents have full access. Operation Nightfall. The cover-ups. Your offshore accounts. All of it. Kira's voice remained conversational, almost gentle. "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Webb's hand moved toward his sidearm. Kira didn't flinch. The warehouse lights died. Oscar's contractors came through the skylights on breaching lines, through the service doors, through firing positions Webb's team never knew existed. Suppressed gunfire strobed in the darkness like dying stars. The engagement lasted 11 seconds. When the emergency lighting flickered on, Webb was on his knees, disarmed, surrounded. His contractors were zip-tied or bleeding out, their certainty shattered. Kira walked forward until she stood directly in front of her former handler. She crouched, meeting his eyes at level. "You taught me fear was weakness," she said quietly. "You were wrong. Fear is information. And calm." She smiled. "Calm is the space where monsters live." She stood, turned, and walked away. Oscar's people would handle the rest. The Velvet Anchor reopened 6 weeks after the incident, following what the insurance company classified as renovations due to structural damage. The new owner, a shell corporation registered in Delaware and funded through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, had invested heavily in upgraded security systems, reinforced doors, and a private booth in the back corner with bulletproof glass that looked like ordinary windows. Kira Bailey walked through the front entrance at 7 p.m. on a Friday, wearing a black dress that cost more than 3 months of her former salary. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She wore no apron, no name tag, no mask of practiced invisibility. The staff recognized her immediately. A few whispered. Most simply watched as she moved through the dining room with the easy confidence of someone who owned not just the building, but the very air inside it. Oscar Green sat in booth 17, the same corner he'd occupied that Tuesday afternoon when 3 armed men had learned that terror was a currency that didn't spend everywhere. He stood as Kira approached, pulling out the chair across from him with old-world courtesy that masked new-world power. "Miss Bailey," he said, though they both knew that name was as dead as Marcus Webb. "Mr. Green." She sat, accepting a glass of Bordeaux from a server who moved with the nervous precision of someone aware they were serving royalty. They didn't speak immediately. Around them, the restaurant hummed with the careful energy of patrons who understood they were dining in a place that had become legendary. The viral video still circulated. The story still grew. But the truth, the real story of ghosts and ledgers and 31 dead operatives who finally got their due, would never be told. Oscar raised his glass. "To new beginnings." Kira touched her glass to his, the crystal singing a single perfect note. to knowing when to stop hiding. Through the window, Chicago glittered like broken glass under streetlights. The city moved on, indifferent and eternal, while in booth 17, a waitress who had become a weapon, who had become a queen, sat across from the man who'd been wise enough to recognize what everyone else had missed. She took a sip of wine and didn't spill a drop. She didn't spill a drop. Smash that like button if Kira's transformation gave you chills. From pouring wine with a gun to her head to owning the entire restaurant, this is what evolution looks like. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories where the forgotten become unforgettable. Comment below, favorite moment, the robbery, the knife fight, or the final wine sip.